good to go.
Cool. All right, so quick minor poll. How many people here would consider themselves kind of engineers, programmers, / data scientists? All right, most people. All right, so I'm gonna give high level things and then I'll pause and talk a little bit about the data technology underneath because I assume that's more interesting to you, but if it's not, just tell me. All right, so today we're gonna talk about traffic, which everyone hates, except for me. Sometimes I don't mind traffic because sometimes I think that appalling traffic and having nowhere to find parking are the best weapons we have in trying to get cities to invest in things like transit and bike and other things, and people to choose alternative modes and alternative ways of living besides driving everywhere. So while most cities want death to traffic, I think we want a productive death to traffic that doesn't just make it easy for everyone to drive everywhere. So I want to talk about current transportation infrastructure practices, big data, what it can actually mean. Guys, I'm grabbing the door for Roy. What big data can actually mean, and what's sort of just an irritating buzzword in data that's not actually that big. I want to talk about a few case studies because that's usually the most exciting way to talk about something in an actual project. And then talk about what big important things we see moving forward, and definitely we should talk about evacuations because that has highlighted to a lot of people who hadn't thought about transportation infrastructure just how important clever investment is. All right, so I feel like I go around and I talk about transportation a lot to a lot of people in a lot of different contexts. Sometimes I'm at gray office buildings in the Department of Transportation, sometimes I'm at hip incubator accelerator spaces like this, and I feel like a lot of times it's a very bifurcated world. And in one of the worlds, I go to these meetings and everybody there is very euphoric and we talk about autonomous vehicles and how little drones are going to deliver our stuff to us and it'll all be perfect and there'll be a hypertube and blah, 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 blah. And it's very euphoric about the future of transportation. I think this morning a jet taxi service like Uber but with airplanes got $90 million Series B or something. So clearly there's a lot of euphoria about what's going on in transportation. But I also actually sell transportation products to actual transportation agencies and providers, and it is not euphoric. Our bridges are crumbling. They are burning to the ground. If like a little gasoline tank fire happens underneath them, we've all seen what happened with the evacuation and how totally unprepared the infrastructure was for that. And when I'm at these agencies, we're making these decisions, they are woefully underfunded and woefully understaffed. Like for example, I once needed some count data from the city of Oakland. And so I said, hey, I see this data on your website. Can you guys just send me the Excel? Because we're working on a project for the city of Oakland. And they were like, I don't know. Nothing happens. The whole project ends. 8 months later, someone responds to my email. It's like, hey, we actually discovered that the person who knew where this Excel file was fired in layoffs and nobody else knows the password, so we're never gonna be able to get it out of the file system for you. You're like, all right. So not to pick on Oakland, I live there, I love it, but those are the people who actually have the power and the money, and contrast that with this euphoric conversation. It's very disjointed what's going on. So we hope that by using big data, we can start to bridge a little bit of that gap and get the miserable reality of today, where it takes 2 hours to get across the Bay Bridge, a little bit more like the euphoric future of tomorrow. And I think one of the real things that's holding back the existing transportation industry is a lack of data. So if you don't have data to measure what's happening on the ground and how things change, then trying to make a model that says, oh, this bridge is better located than that bridge is just impossible, right? And so our main competition when we're bringing in big data as a measurement system is really old-fashioned status quo stuff. Our number one competition is surveys. Paper surveys, people standing, you've seen them in BART, they like try to ask you questions when you're on the BART. They send mailers to people's homes, try to get responses. Sometimes they're on the phone or on the internet. Very, very, very low response rate, very skewed responses. Our second biggest competition, have you guys also seen there's like a tripod by the road and then there's like a hose and then it goes away? That is our second biggest competition. So this is very old-fashioned technology, but people are very used to it. And all that technology, it has many bad attributes. It's not very accurate, which is important. It's expensive because there's always a new piece of hardware that has to be maintained. And also it's not easily extensible. So if you thought the problem was on 3rd Street and then you realized really to understand that traffic you needed to measure Bryant and Harrison and these 5 other streets around, you can't go, it's very expensive. It's linearly expensive to expand what you're measuring. And as a result, measurement is very, very, very rarely done. And I think that's one of the fundamental problems we have in transportation is that we're not measuring what's going on. So I think we need data that describes current behavior, first and foremost, what is happening, describes how things change over time so we can see, hey, when the new bike share program was launched, We saw a reduction. That would be good to know. And diagnoses problems and predict solutions. It's useful to say, hey, there's a problem there. It's more useful to say, hey, there's a problem on 3rd because of the way the ballpark lets out on these days a week, and to fix it, probably we should redirect traffic and, onto 2nd and 1st, something like that. So that's what we tried to build. Collect, measure, and report back are sort of the action items that go along with that data vision of mine. So luckily, there's a lot of data out there. People are talking about the Internet of Things, big buzzword. Not entirely sure what it means. I think what it's morphed to meaning, in my experience, is large technology companies, many of whom I like and work with, like AT&T and GE and Cisco, are convincing cities to spend a huge amount of money on new physical sensors and then having data connectivity between the sensors. And that's fine, and there's plenty of times when you need that. But I think we have a really scary amount of overspending that's going into some of the assumptions around that. Because anytime you're building hardware, it's fixed, you have to maintain it, you have to upgrade it. It's just not a very smart investment. So instead, what we're recommending is that cities take advantage of the hardware that's constantly deployed and always updating, which are all these smartphones in people's pockets. So we work with about 350 different app providers who collect location-based services in the background, and about a couple million cars that have navigation systems and a couple million trucks that have fleet management systems. And we take advantage of the fact that they're collecting data constantly in all kinds of ways, and that they usually have GPS or another locational technology pinging where the device is. So instead of building $10 million worth of fancy sensors in your IoT, build $1 million of fancy sensors, invest in $1 million of analytics on smartphones, and spend the remaining $8 million on something like actually building that bike lane or subsidizing BART tickets or something like that. My very big high-level part, and then I want to get into case studies. Any key questions before we dive in? All right. So here's some data. So what you see is a few minutes of our data. I think it's Fremont. You see two colors. The blue dots come from the connected cars and connected trucks. You can see them really tightly following the road. That oval is a circular drive around a strip mall that has a Target and a few other things. So you sort of see that circular drive, and then you see these little this is not weird. That's somebody circling around and moving into the parking space and doing all this kind of stuff. So very spatially precise, very vehicular oriented because it comes from vehicles. The purple dots are all of the dots from the location-based services app. So if you look in your phone in the upper right corner, there's like a pointy arrow, and it's black or white or not filled in. I think it's the same for Android. That means that some app is tracking your location. And it may be that you pulled it up. Yeah, everybody checks their phone. It may be that you're actively looking for the closest donut shop, so you know, but a lot of them are tracking your location in the background. And they do that to say, hey, congratulations, Nikhil, you took 10,000 steps. Or they say, hey, you just walked into the store, you have this store's brand app, and we know that you're there now, so we're gonna send you coupons on this thing that's on sale. Dating apps create a ton of data for us because there's a lot of dating apps that say, hey, this guy you swiped right on is also in this part of town. Coupon apps are huge, weather apps are big, and I'm sure about to get bigger, that say, hey, the weather's about to change where you are, bring your umbrella. Google Now that tells you oh, it'll take you, your meeting's at 10, but there's traffic, and based on where you are now, I think you should leave right now. All that stuff is tracking your location all the time in the background. So that's what the purple dots are from. And the purple dots are interesting. So the apps we work with and the SDK we work with, it gives you the best possible locational ping for the least battery drain. And it sort of piggybacks on whatever's happening. So if you're using your GPS for navigation, it's going to take advantage of your GPS. But if you're not, and it doesn't want to, maybe you only have 20% left, it's going to use the fact that all the Wi-Fis are mapped, and it can feel which Wi-Fis you're near, or Bluetooth proximity, or assisted GPS from the towers, etc. So that data is huge. We have about 12% of the population right now in the US and Canada, but it's much more variable and thus requires a little more intelligence to process into sensible patterns. Any questions on the data sources?
Why are certain dots smaller than others?
Because they used a different technology to ping. So the small dots are the ones who are piggybacking on a GPS device or GPS app, and the big ones are saying, hey, I don't want to drain the battery, I'm going to just use cellular triangulation.
Your location is more precise.
Yeah, exactly. And also just the way a lot of the locational technologies work, when you start to move, it gets better at pinging you because that's how it works in a way I don't entirely understand. So that's interesting too. So we organize these dots into patterns. Like a pattern might be the dot was still here and then went and then was still here. And so that's 2 activities and a trip. And then maybe we say, okay, this activity was at a residential location and it left at 8 a.m. and it leaves this residential block every morning at 8 a.m. So I'm going to assume 80–90% chance it lives there. And this trip went like here, but the only way it could have achieved all those points was to follow exactly this road network based on speed limits and other stuff we know. So here we'll lock it to the route. And then this place is in a office park. So probably they went to work, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then we mesh that with data that says people who live on this block we know have an 80% chance of making more than $100,000 a year. And to go this fast, you must have been driving, not riding your bike. So we look at all the context to turn all this mess into patterns. I should also add that we don't know it's your phone. It doesn't say Laura's phone. I'm device 5687. And it's a hashed identifier. If you'd like more information about how to rotate your hash or take other actions, I'm happy to share them, and they're also on our privacy page. So all what I described is taking what is a mess of big data and all the data science I described. No government agency, no Department of Transportation person has any interest in doing any of that. So our value proposition, because as you know, y'all are working on startups, you have to make money to make your business survive, is to take all the hassle of dealing with that data and turning it into a small thing that agency people and engineers at engineering firms can say, oh great, let me just go ask it a question. And that's our Streetlight Insight web app. So I want to give you a few case studies very quickly of cities doing that, and then we can talk about some of the really interesting stuff that's happened in this last month about infrastructure planning. All right, so most of what we do is we feed data to help engineers and government agencies decide what infrastructure to invest in. And sometimes infrastructure is really big, like building a new highway, and sometimes it's really small, like should the stoplight change every 15 seconds or every 25 seconds, and sometimes it's medium, like we need to put a bike lane somewhere. So this was an interesting one, so it's for Napa. As you can imagine, Napa has some interesting traffic problems. And it has a few interesting traffic problems. It's seasonal, because they have tourism, but they also have a lot of people live there. They have a lot of people moving there who are commuting down to the Bay because it's cheaper than the Bay. And then all the people who used to live in Napa had to move out, like the farm workers, and then have to commute in to go to work because they now live outside of Napa. It's too expensive. And the result is the traffic is horrible, but to maintain their rustic rural vibe, they don't want to expand the roads. They want to keep them 2-road, windy roads, and traffic is just appalling. So their question was, all the people come to these citizen events and are blaming the tourists and saying we have to do all this stuff for the tourists, but the planners aren't sure that it's really the tourists that are causing the traffic. So they basically had us break down all the places where highways cross into the county of Napa and said for each of those places, tell us where the people are going to. Are they cutting through Napa on the way to the Bay? Are they going somewhere in Napa? And are they tourists? Are they workers coming in or residents going out? Like who is causing all this traffic empirically as opposed to a bunch of people at a rowdy stakeholder meeting just yelling at each other, which is actually what happens. And we said, okay, easy, we can tell you. So at one of the traffic jams, which I think was up here, we said 55% of the people up in this traffic jam they live in Napa, they're going around Napa, they're staying in Napa, it's totally internal. And in theory, those are the people you care the most about because they're your constituents fully. And of the other people, the imported trips, when we dug into them more, it seemed mostly to be farm workers for whom housing prices had forced them to live outside of the county who needed to come in to work at the vineyards and the other places. And of the rest, some of it was residents leaving to work outside, but only 11% were people cutting through Napa on their way to someone else. And if you had listened to the yelling at the stakeholder meeting, you would have thought it was like 85%. So having this empirical sort of intuitive data to go back to the stakeholders and say, hey, look, we listened, we checked, we invested in this, we used this cool new technology. You guys all know how your phone knows where you are. We think it's only 11%. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna reroute our bus system to go have a worker to change the bus routes because no one's using the buses, but we realize that actually our routes have changed as our housing prices changed and thus our commute patterns changed. So as a result of this analysis, they rerouted their bus systems to try to give more bus service to workers who lived outside of Napa to come in and do the vineyard loop to be dropped off. which is a very nice, clean use case of how the empirical data not only gave them an efficient investment decision, but also helped them communicate with stakeholders about why they were doing it, which frankly was just as important to the success of this project as the actual expenditure of money and the outcome, because there's a lot of elected officials who don't like to get yelled at. Any questions on that case study?
Do you know the impact?
That's a really good question. So one of the other, my end of presentation is to rail about how nobody ever measures the impact of everything, and we're still struggling to get our own clients to measure the impact of their decisions because it's just not done. But anecdotally, we've heard the impact is good. One of the other hard things is that it usually takes a couple years for the impact of infrastructure to be felt. So sometimes we'll know in a couple years.
Do you have any sense of like, are the buses better utilized or anything?
Yes, utilization has gone up. That we know. And then you have this eternal question of like, does that just mean more people are going in and out, or did it really pull cars off the road? Both would be okay outcomes.
Yeah.
Like Napa, from an economic perspective, it wants people to come in and out. So if more people are coming with less traffic, that's still a good outcome. But we're not clear which one it was.
When you say you have 12% of smartphones data, what's to say you don't have a skewed perspective there?
It's a great question. I don't have the map with me, but on our website, we dig into this question. So 2 things. First of all, we check. So since we infer home block and block group, we can say, okay, here's the map of where Streetlight population lives. Let's compare that to the census population and see if the ratio is consistent. And in general, the ratio is quite consistent and ranges from like 6 to 14, which is pretty good. And we adjust. So each of our devices, if I live on a block with 1 Streetlight device and 10 actual census people, I count for 10 people, kind of. And if you live on a device that has 2 Streetlight people and 10 actual people, you only count for 5 people. So we scale on a device by device level, and because geographic home location is highly correlated with socioeconomic factors in America, that helps us de-skew. The other thing we found is that there's not that much skew for income because smartphone usage is just prevalent for all incomes, and you don't need to have a contract to be in our system. You could have a burner phone. We see phones spending the night in Golden Gate Park. We see a ton of probably illegal phones in prisons that just stay in the prison all the time. We see, it actually really screwed up our analytics at the beginning. We see all kinds of stuff. The skew we probably have is against the elderly because they don't use, even if they have smartphones, they don't use the location-based services as much. But that's hard to measure. All right. Another cool case study, again, traffic. Have y'all ever driven around DC?
I'm from Northern Virginia.
Yeah, it's appalling.
Yeah,
it's just appalling. And what's interesting is, like Napa, most traditional agencies' response to traffic is to do highway expansion, even though everyone knows it doesn't work in the long term. It just fills up with more cars. But they love it, and there's construction, and they get to cut ribbons. But Northern Virginia is full. Like, there's people and houses around, so they can't expand the highways. So we did a really cool application with them where we said, okay, we know there's traffic everywhere. We scanned every mile of road there and every little block basically and said, okay, we have a hypothesis. Our hypothesis is that if there's a lot of traffic on the road that shares origin and destinations, they're really like a virtual bus because they're following a bus route. It's just a bus made out of 55 cars with individual drivers. So in those places, if we actually put a bus there, our hypothesis is that it would be a good investment. And our other hypothesis is if there are places where there's car trips that are less than 1 mile long or less than 3 miles long, that's a really good opportunity to put in pedestrian infrastructure, biking infrastructure, maybe some shuttles. So we scanned all of Northern Virginia looking for these patterns, and there were really some places that had these patterns in really intense ways. So we ranked them all, and then we did some we and our consulting partners did some investigations about like what's up with those places, does it make sense? Some of them, it was very interesting, like the forts up there lit up pretty hot, and we were talking, and we had like this whole meeting with the commandants. I think it's Fort Lee, is that right? Anyway, some marina fort up there. So we had this commandant, like a whole outfit. And she was saying, yeah, you know, we were like, why do you do this? You have this bus stop here. She's like, yes, but on the fort, to get between the meetings, you have to go across the road, and there's no way to get across the road, and there's no sidewalks, and there's no crosswalks. So people drive to work, even though they could take the bus to work, because to go around during the day around the fort, we don't have stuff for them. And that causes congestion on the civilians' highways, which is a really interesting problem. So it was a very interesting set of conversations driven by the big data. And Virginia has this very interesting policy. It used to be called HB2, but then when the North Carolina bathroom law was also called HB2, they had to stop calling it HB2 because all their Google results were screwed up, so they changed it into like smart steps or like smart some, you know, it was pretty funny. But they said our data was, in this case, was required to basically it's a government scorecard that helps rank what to invest in based on how many units of traffic can be saved per dollar spent. And our data is now the input to rank a lot of those investments, which is a really well-organized way to choose your investment strategy. And those projects, I mean, again, it takes a while in government infrastructure. Those projects were, I did this project a year ago, and the projects have now been selected and they're starting to be built this fall, which is great. Here's one. This is, you guys ever shopped at Tyson's Corner Mall? Anyway, it's a big mall. What we found there is there was a ton of short car trips and a ton of people on the highways because they wanted to go to the mall, but to go to the mall you have to cross the beltway, and there's no, it's like a moat. It's a road moat because there's no way to get across it, so people will get on it for like 2 stops and then get off, and being on a highway for 2 stops is like the worst thing a traffic engineer would want because you're on the road and you're doing a lot of lane switching, but you're not even really using the highway. So we also found that digging under and making some tunnels and sort of penetrating the moat of the beltway would be a really good use of dollars, which was cool.
Did they do it?
That's the most expensive one, so they will do it, but the bikeways and the shuttle buses were cheaper to deploy faster. There's another one where they had this park and ride station, and it was getting parked out at 6 a.m., which happens a lot at park and ride stations for the metro. And all these people were driving like half a mile to get to the park and ride station. They're like, why don't you walk? It's because there are no crosswalks. Again, someone who lives there could have told you, but to systemically scan everything like that and rank them is very, very powerful. All right, really quickly, last one, much smaller in scale. Ann Arbor, Michigan, apparently has horrible traffic. Who knew? And they invested in green wave technology, which actually San Francisco has a lot of. It's when if you hit the light right, if you keep on going, everything should be green. And not only is that pleasant, but starting and stopping causes disproportionate traffic compared to many times. So I think everybody can imagine how, you know, you've all driven. So they invested in green wave technology. They're very proud of their green wave. And then some people said that because the green wave was this way, the people traveling that way were getting screwed over by the green wave. So they were like, okay, well, it's interesting. First of all, we'd like to know if the green wave worked, because people still complain about how trafficy and slow it is. And second, is it disrupting these people's lives? And so we were able to do what we were talking about before and after measurement, to say, okay, this is a time when we know when the infrastructure was put in, we've gone through the deployment phase, and we can measure what actually improved. And we found that yes, especially at times that weren't already that congested, your travel time improved drastically. You cut out that time when you're sitting at the red light and you're like, no one is here. Why is the light still red? This is so stupid. So weekends and off-peak times, drastic improvement in travel time. But during game days, it just doesn't help. Like there's sort of nothing you can do when traffic gets that bad, no matter how clever you are. So it was an interesting conclusion. And we also found that the cross-cutting people were not being messed up. They were just whining. So those are 3 interesting case studies. The most important thing I wanted to emphasize, which we got into a little, is that what's lacking still is a habit of reporting back on how things went. There is no practice of doing impact studies in a systemic way in the transportation industry. So things that even advocates, you know, long-term urban advocates, even things that they claim to be universally good, often those claims are based on like 3 partially done studies in totally different parts of the country. And a systemic approach to measuring what works, if we don't have that, we're not going to be able to survive the onslaught of hurricanes and climate change and urbanization and Uber and Lyft and delivery economy. There's just nothing we can do without systemic measurement because things are changing so fast and the urban problems are so sharp. So that's what we're trying to do at Streetlight Data, but because of this audience, I'm also trying to make a startup business that is successful. So we have a product, the app, we sell it, our clients use it, they appear happy. Claire's in support, she knows when they're not happy. And that's great. But to sell the product effectively and to be a good business person, we can't force them to do certain things with it, right? We can't tell them that they're required to do a before and after measurement to, you know, use our software. We can say, hey, you can do this cool thing. Isn't that exciting? And like 1 or 2 people at the agency might think it's exciting, but it requires both the availability of the technology to make them envision what's possible, and also the political work of having them make the choice to do some of these newer things in conjunction with each other. And at the meantime, like all of y'all who are doing startups, you know, we have to worry every day about payroll and what new feature to invest in versus the other one, and how much support to give the clients, and should they just teach themselves, and all the normal problems of business. And it's been a big learning curve for me as someone who came more from the advocacy and academic and nonprofit side to balance the businesswoman thing with the, hey, I want this technology to change the way transportation happens thing. And if your business goes out of business, then you don't get to change anything. So that's been an interesting challenge, and one that I've gotten more accustomed to, but it took me a while at the beginning. So that's all I have to say. So hurricanes. I don't want hurricanes, but it's interesting to me when the news and everyday people actually start to talk about transportation infrastructure. Like, oh my gosh, yeah, like it costs $4 billion to build 4 miles of highway. And you're like, mm-hmm. Like, it's really expensive if we choose to do this, and if we put it in the wrong place and it goes under, it's ridiculous. So we're gonna be doing some analysis on infrastructure preparedness. We've already done, for certain cities, a lot of evacuation studies. But I think one of the things I'm interested in studying with what's been going on the last few weeks is when people started fleeing, like how soon people respond to the calls to evacuate. Like, do they wait an hour? Do they wait 12 hours? Do they wait 48 hours? And to see what kind of people in mass respond more actively to requests from the evacuation people. And then it'll be also interesting to see over the long term where people go back to, like after they evacuated. So those are academically interesting questions, but evacuation preparedness. The interesting thing about what's it called, Rita, the one that came 4 years ago, 5 years ago, maybe longer, was that more people died in the rush to evacuate Rita than died in Harvey. So bad evacuation planning can really be catastrophic, and we don't know what's going to happen tonight when people really start to freak out about Irma. So I think I hope it will encourage people to think more proactively about their transportation plans.
With doing before and after studies, is there any reason that you couldn't do the after study just for your own case, like case study portfolio as a way to potentially sell more?
Yes.
Like, how expensive is it for you to invest in doing that?
It's not expensive in terms of data, because all our data updates every night or every month, just ubiquitously across the US and Canada. It's just a matter of bandwidth. So we actually, speaking of which, we are hiring. Not that any of you guys need jobs. Maybe you have friends who need jobs. We just posted a job called like lead analytics engineer or something. And this person's entire job will be to run interesting custom studies for our clients who sometimes want things that are in our app, but also for ourselves. So if you would like to be the person who runs the before and after studies, or your friend would, check out streetlightdata.com/join us. Any other questions? Yes?
Sorry, I missed the talk, so this might be a not relevant question, but I'm curious, Elon's new company, the boring
Which
company.
one? Oh, that one, yeah.
Yeah, so supposedly he wants to build these tunnels at a cost of about $1 billion a mile.
Yeah.
How does that compare the cost to the cost of like building freeways? And also, like, what do you think about the idea in general?
I'm also interested to see what other people think. So I'm not a deep expert in this. I'm only like a cat. I don't think if his thing actually costs $1 billion a mile, it's comparable. But no one knows if that's really what it's going to cost, because the cost of building the highway is not only the cost of the cement and the steel. It's the cost of dealing with the environmental review and the suits that go in and all that kind of stuff. And the boring, the holes, the tunnels haven't dealt with that yet. And that can double or triple your cost. I think in general, for transportation innovation ideas, we're kind of so screwed on for anybody trying anything. Like, So in general, I'm pro new attempts. At the same time, he's so important and he pulls so many smart people that I might rather them work on something that's more socially equitable and more scalable. Like, it's one of these, it's like when I did a lot of work in renewable energy, and it's frustrating to see all these brilliant people work on these very snazzy technologies when BART can't get $1 billion to do its upgrades, and you know our roads are full of and you're sort of like, could we have all those brilliant people figure out a better funding strategy for public transit and not have their brilliance spent on digging a tunnel that may or may not work under LA. So I don't really mind, but then depending on my mood, sometimes I mind. I also, it's really hard digging holes. It just is. Like, I come from Virginia and I've been in a lot of coal mines, and like, those things are pretty heavily engineered and they still fall down and like blow up people all the time. But I guess we have a tunnel under the bay, but it's not that long. So I don't know, I have mixed feelings, if you can't tell.
It's also going to be phenomenally expensive to use, right?
Yeah.
Like, you're gonna,
It is. And I'm fine with the Tesla being, like, that's like starting with the luxury subset of the market, I think is a perfectly good strategy for trying out new things. But again, I don't think this tunnel thing is very scalable.
it's interesting.
I'm not sure how scalable jet taxis are either, but apparently they get.
But I think the idea is because these tunnels are way narrower than any like freeway is required. Like it's just the width of a car and a little bit more.
Yeah.
Supposedly, structurally, it can be made more sound at a lower cost and
It may be able to, but there's a lot of stuff down there.
Yeah.
And it also, I don't know, have they decided if it's gonna be for cars or if it's gonna be for trains?
It's for these pods.
Yeah, the pods.
Transport cars.
Yeah. I mean, mostly I'm like, sure, try it. We're just, you know, if anything works, can't get any worse in terms of LA transportation, so why not? I did ride the new LA light rail system that they put in, the one that goes from Santa Monica to downtown, and it was lovely and beautiful, and I had the entire car to myself at 8 a.m. on a Thursday. That's frustrating. Can we work on that first? And
Why do you think that is? Did they put it in the wrong place?
I don't know that much about Santa Monica, but it might be a network effect. Like even once you I happen to be going to the LA Department of Transportation, which is right near the stop in downtown LA, so maybe it doesn't go to, it's just a network effect. But I also think it's just about car culture down there.
I grew up in Santa Monica, and I know my parents and a lot of people only take it on weekends, and it's kind of viewed, at least by my parents, as a lot of people take it out to the beach who live in the valley or someplace else.
Yeah.
But my dad doesn't take it to work, of course, because there's not enough of an infrastructure to rely on that.
So I hope it can just be the start of more infrastructure and not, like, I grew up in Virginia and there's this, they put a light rail in sort of Newport News, Virginia Beach area, and it's not getting a lot of ridership, and it is this huge political problem because they spent a lot of money on it. It's one of the things where the first investment doesn't pay off that well because of the way that transit and network effects work. So I hope it doesn't happen with that Santa Monica investment down there.
Yeah, I grew up in Northern Virginia where the metro is super popular, and a lot of it is underground, and I think like it works well for a city like DC where it's not built very high and above ground, like you want it to be kind of visible and beautiful. In Philadelphia where I went to college, the SEPTA was not as well used, and it's because they only had 2 lines, so it didn't have the same reach or same, like you said, network effects.
And one of the things, and Teresa, you can tell me if you disagree, when I talk to a lot of transit people, like I was on these climate, what's it called, San Francisco Transportation Climate Forum group that was advising their policy. They're like, well, you know, people just need to understand, like if they make one transfer here, they can do all these things, or the transfer is just 3 blocks away. And in my head, I'm like, no one is going to make the transfer. Yeah. It's just against human nature to make too many transfers like that.
It's the most efficient type of transportation, the transit systems that have transfers, but it's not,
People hate it.
I'm curious, do you have any data on like the demographics and culture? Because across different places, meaning like in New York, businessmen will take the subway, but I think like my dad's in the entertainment industry. Like I know like the psychology of like he bought like the cheapest luxury car because to be in the entertainment industry you needed to have a luxury car.
Yeah.
Like there's an image problem like there. So like I wonder how much it has to do with like LA being entertainment versus like have you been able to measure like either levels of wealth of who takes the subway or bus in different places, or and based on like geography and quantify that at all? Like,
I mean, it is skewed. Like transit ridership generally is skewed towards like lower income stratas. It varies by city. Like in New York, it's a higher income strata that takes the metro. I think in LA the rail lines start skewing up on the income brackets. For bus, it tends to be on the lower income brackets, so it does skew. But I wouldn't know off the top of my head in LA.
Also, weather has a lot to do with things, which you'd think would make LA more transit friendly, but in some places, like DC, being on that subway in the summer is not the most pleasant experience. But I did discover when I lived in DC, I could take the bus like directly from my house, basically across the street from my work, and it was like having my own giant air-conditioned limo because no one was on the bus at 8 a.m. on work days. So I haven't done that systemic study. Other people have. I think that it'd be interesting to do something like that with big data because you could get it so systemically. But also, one of the most interesting studies I read, which is a little bit tangential, is it's about culture. It's also just about habit. There's so many Americans who have never taken public transit in their own city or outside of New York City. So I think this was a Berkeley study. Berkeley did a deal with AC Transit to give students free bus.
Berkeley,
Yeah, me too. So free bus passes, which was just about efficiency and getting people to and from campus, and it worked out for everyone. But one of the effects they found is that because all these students had experience riding buses, we're like, yeah, sure, buses work. Their bus ridership, even though they're highly educated, eventually high-income people, they rode buses way more because they just got used to it and had positive experience with it.
Oh yeah, I just signed up for the Ford bike thing, and that was like 2 years before I finally just overcame the hurdle, and now I use it all the time.
Yeah. So that's an interesting one.
Do you think Uber has helped in cities?
Yes. And I know that Uber has other flaws. I'm sure they do. But my general opinion is that they and Lyft and all the people who come after have done immense good for cities because they've broken open the possibility that you cannot own a car. And I know that Ubers are cars, but it is systemically been proven again and again and again that if you have to pay for every ride, you take cars less and you do things more efficiently. Like I tried to give up my car several times living in Oakland and living in San Francisco, and it would always just become very inconvenient. But then Uber happened and I was like, oh, so for those emergency rides or those really long trips to the doctor's offices that are not transitable, now I don't have a car. So I think, and I also think in cities that really don't have good transit, like second tier US cities, it's immensely helpful.
I think that's one. Sorry.
How much of Streetlight data's problem is an engineering problem versus convincing all these government officials and administration officials of you could assume that like you have a ton of insights about every city right now, and you could make a lot of insights, come up with a lot of insights and say that this is what you should change for each city. How much of the problem is actually like, well, you're not able to come up with these insights versus, or you don't have enough data, or it's an engineering thing, or is it actually just getting in front of the right people and making sure that you can convince them with this data?
It's a very good question. I think it's more about convincing, but I think the buzz around big data and the fact that it feels empirical and you're not coming to them, like the old way engineers come to them and say, hey, we built a model and it said to do this. And you're like, nobody knows what a model is. That's very confusing. Even though the models are great and I like spend a lot of my education learning how to build them and they work reasonably well. Big data helps change the conversation, but it's still fundamentally political. Except when our clients are people, not that any of these are clients because I can't disclose our private sector clients, but we have clients that do things like are the private operator of the toll roads or the private rideshare company or the private jet taxi company or the private shuttle system that's $5 instead of $2. Those are our clients too. And in those cases, sometimes they will be a lot more data driven. And those are coming to fill a gap that the US decided to open up in transportation by underfunding it so drastically. So now the private sector companies are there too.
But for the biggest change that you guys want to make happen, I'm assuming that the government has to basically.
Yes. And going back to the startup side, 5 years ago when I was starting, if you said I'm working with government as a tech startup, like, but now it's slightly hip. And occasionally they'll talk to you, the VCs. But still, there's a huge bias, especially with the California investors, against government. So most of our investment is European and East Coast, where there's a lot more investment in GovTech.
GovTech is like so lucrative. If you
I
can
know.
get the good
It's the
products.
biggest single market in the world. Even like, I was reading a report about like city and counties alone spend like $1 trillion a year in the US or something crazy like that.
That's a really interesting way of framing it.
Yeah.
I was going to make a comment actually after I lived in Istanbul for 3 years, and one of the things that horrendous traffic, but one of the primary modes of getting around are these shared taxis called dolmuş, which run along specific routes, and they're marked in the front of the car. They just have a little sign, and so if you want to change route because you're not getting enough traffic, so basically the taxi just sits there until it fills up, or until, if the driver knows that there's going to be really high demand on the way back, they might take off with only 3 people. There are 7 seats in the taxi, but usually wait till it fills up. And so at peak hour, it fills up almost instantly, and you take off. And if the route isn't performing well, and the driver decides he or she wants, in practice basically always he, wants to switch routes, he can literally just put a different sign in the front of his thing, and now he has basically a bus going a different route. And because of that, I'm pretty sure there are lines in Istanbul, like official city bus lines, that ended up springing up following the dolmuş established lines, but it was just this incredibly flexible mode of transit, and also very efficient. That was, as the city was changing very quickly and the population dynamics were changing, it made it very easy to get around economically. And it would be, like the equivalent of, a taxi would cost $15, a bus would cost $1, and a dolmuş would cost like $1.50. I mean, it was basically, it was almost public levels.
Yeah, and then when I lived in Tanzania, they had matatus, which had similar.
Yeah, marshukas in the former Soviet Union. It's a very common thing.
And in theory, that's what Liftline and, in a lesser degree, Chariot are trying to do. But I think that's, when you talk about Uber and Lyft being good for cities, I think they are. But Uberpool and Liftline are definitely good for cities.
It's also, there's this European company called BlaBlaCar, which helps coordinate
greatest name ever.
Longer distance trips. Like, I'm driving from Munich to Rome or whatever, and people can sign on for different parts of it and pay in for gas and that type of thing. But one of the parts of their pitch presentation, I remember in the very early days, was 90% of the capacity on highways is unused, is empty seats in cars, because you basically have a driver in a car that has 7 seats, or on a bus that has 40 seats and only 3 of them are filled, or something like this. So if you think about it that way and frame the amount of excess capacity that we have already moving around, that if we can just efficiently slot people into it, there would be much less need for additional cars. I think it's really interesting.
Yeah, so I used to work at Rocket Mountain Institute, and we had another stat like that, which is of the gasoline you burn in the tank, something like 3% of it goes to actually moving your body to the other place. A lot of it is the empty space and how heavy the car has to be able to maybe hold 7 people someday and all that kind of stuff. But then you get into this behavior thing where, so I think it was, another one is that if we look at here, most of the capacity of cars, whatever, 90% of the day, they're just sitting still. They're not actually moving anyone, which is also a giant economic inefficiency. So there was, in the rush of startups, it was Sunil, what's his last name? Paul? I think it was called Sidecar, and Get Around Still Survives, where you like can have a thing and then other people can drive your car. All those effectively stayed incredibly limited to places like Portland and San Francisco and campuses, or died. Except another one just got another ridiculous amount of funding from Daimler out of Europe last week, like $495 million. Yeah. Turo, thank you. Turo, yeah. Via also got funding.
So, okay, Sidecar was basically a Lyft and Uber competitor. Basically,
But-
you're thinking of GetAround maybe? Is GetAround's a Turo competitor?
So
Zero.
yeah, so Uber and Lyft and Zipcar outperform Sidecar because I think of the behavioral holdup of letting someone else drive your car, and I think there are still also and also Uber and Lyft in theory started out being like what you described. Oh, I just happen to be driving back to Oakland. I'll pick up a few people, but actually it's become a professionalized thing. We prefer to drive with someone who's like, it's their job to be an Uber driver because it's professionalized. And what I worry about with GetAround and then with Turo is that it tries to overcome that behavioral thing of a way of sharing the car and sharing a personal space that I don't think Americans are very good at.
People say the same thing about Airbnb.
But Sidecar
Yeah.
was the first to do the thing that Lyft eventually did and UberX eventually
Yeah.
became, which is what made them take off, which were informal drivers.
But they
originally
became
heard of
formal drivers.
Well, they became formal. Yeah, but Sidecar did too, and they just went out of business because they only raised like 30 million instead of 30 billion. But but like I'm confused because I vaguely know what you're talking about. Like the first time I heard about Sidecar, someone pitched to me as like if you're drunk, someone will drive you home in your own car or something like that, and like
Yeah, Sidecar tried a bunch of different things.
Yeah, I think that was one of the first iterations.
But it was like GetAround
way
back then.
when
Yeah.
before, but like it was never like really popular. And I think
Yeah.
they pivoted pretty damn quickly.
They did.
So yeah.
I thought Sidecar was also more complicated because they had drivers set their own prices and that.
Yeah, I mean they tried to make that like a
perhaps-
feature, but I think it ended up being
Yeah,
like way too much
perhaps-
cognitive load, and you're just like,
Yeah.
I don't care if it's $9 or $10, pick them for me,
Yeah.
please.
Sidecar started spinning pretty quickly. But to me, to like get back to the Turo thing, I think Americans are not very good at informal sharing. And I think even with Airbnb, you see it professionalizing. And a lot of their growth is professionalizing.
Turo and GetAround professionally rent out their cars,
Yeah.
so multiple cars.
Yeah, so if it can go in that direction, I think that sounds fine. But
You rent your car.
Yeah, I rented my car on GetAround, I put my place on Airbnb, and like it ends up going towards professional. I completely agree with you because like on Airbnb I get like a bad review because I had like the history of the Third Reich book that had a Nazi sign on it. I'm Jewish for the record. Like
So you were
on
just
my
interested,
bookshelf,
yeah.
and it was like it's like the definitive like history, and like I got a bad review because like it offended this woman's eyes or something that it was there, and like when you I was just like there's nothing you can do as like a casual host to to like basically like make sure that like everyone is happy in all these cases.
Yeah.
Everyone's got like little idiosyncrasies, and I've heard stats that basically should say that like some ridiculous percentage of Airbnbs are now professionally managed in one way or another, and are permanent Airbnb properties, or like they'll be taken on by someone like Pillow or one of these other management firms that basically say you must rent it out a minimum of 3 to 4 months, and as a consequence then they have a whole system to come in. And so like because it's not feasible, because I'm not going to like leave my house and then turn every potentially offensive book around my bookshelf or something, like, and it's just like it's incredibly tough.
right,
So.
all of which I think is fine and good. Like it doesn't bother me in the least. But when I get into these conversations about like when I'm stuck on the bridge and I'm like, oh, this empty space, I've sort of lost faith in Americans who are not crazy SF kids like us really going in for this sort of sharing in a systemic way. I think the solution is different.
Well, I think it's because you end up getting a bad rating like that. Like me, and it was like, well, fuck, I guess I can't rent it at all. And like so, like in some cases, it's like the 10% ruins it for everyone else.
Oh yeah.
It was the same thing with like the car. It was like when I used to rent it out, it was like, well, one little thing was wrong.
One person smoked in the car.
Yeah, and then everything. People don't have a lot of flexibility at all. Like, so I don't know how you solve that. But
I just think that I'm all like in transportation, which is all I really know about sharing economy stuff. I think it's limited to a very limited demographic, and I just don't think it's scalable because I think at a bigger level you have to professionalize around it.
Yeah.
Because that's what people want.
I have heard analysis around that goes both ways around like self-driving cars and congestion. So like, is it in 10 years when all cars are connected and self-driving, is the existing infrastructure going to be able to support and like completely solve all traffic problems, or is it going to be like a lot more?
I think there's going to be a lot more, but no one knows. So one of the best micro simulations I saw was like, what happens if the self-driving cars follow the law and the other cars drive like humans drive, which is not following the law? And so one of the laws says you have to be like 5 car lengths behind if you're going 50 miles an hour, right? Like you have to have that lead time. So you see this micro simulation of the self-driving car has this space, and the other cars are like, ooh, space. And they cut in, and the self-driving car falls back, and they cut in, and the self-driving car falls back. And then like at the end, the self-driving car is going like really, really slow and screwing up traffic for everyone, which is hysterical. So I think it will create another traffic apocalypse personally during the transition period, because I don't think we're capable of planning that well. But in the long run, it may help. I would like to be in a self-driving car, and I think the safety implications will be quite good.
I can see it being something where there are, just like there's a carpool lane now, where there becomes like 2 lanes that are self-driving car only.
Yeah. And that's what the really advanced cities like Singapore are looking to build. The zones for the transition period, where like if you have a self-driving car, if you're outside of the zone, you have to move it back to driving. But then that's interesting, because then the cars have to be hybrid, which makes them more expensive than if they were one or the other.
But if the cost of owning a car is made way more than just using self-driving cars, the market will solve it.
Yeah. But
The cost of insurance could be prohibitive. Like if you have a self-driving car, like if you drive the car yourself, eventually the cost of insurance will be high.
yeah. So I don't think anybody really knows, but I think it could go either way. And I think also different countries are really pursuing different strategies. So I think maybe Japan will do it perfectly, and Singapore, and maybe France will screw it up, and then we'll all know. And whoever goes first then loses the benefit of seeing what everybody else does, which sucks for them. I don't know what time it is.
It's 12:56.
Oh, great. We're so on time.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming in. Well, sorry, didn't mean to cut off. Are there
Actually, I was going to ask about the, you were talking about your business for a while, and how much of your product is, like, is it a product where city planners or whatever can go and grab insights, or they can go and study the data themselves versus consultative?
Oh, that is the $1 million question. So a person who is a technical city planner, like someone who has a degree, and many of them have masters in transportation engineering, they can use it. If you are not technical at all, like if you don't use Excel or you don't really think about transportation, it might take some training. So we don't consult, though we're considering starting a special consultative arm because we get asked by a lot of non-technical people. We have consulting partners, and if projects like the stakeholder meetings, we came because they wanted us to do a presentation, but we weren't running all that. So we have consultative partners that we go in conjunction with if we're dealing with a less technical client. And often, again, from the GovTech point of view, it's more efficient to be a subcontractor to a giant company that maintains a generalized contract with an agency. Like AECOM, biggest engineering firm in the world, we can do a $15,000 deal with AECOM and it's effective. Trying to do a $15,000 deal with an agency direct is just terrible. So that's also, it's also like procurement.
I guess it's like, I see a lot of similarities with your business with Palantir, in the sense that they're collecting a lot of data about individuals and users, and they sold directly to agencies. But I don't think those agencies would have been useful in using that data if Palantir didn't have the consultative arm.
Yeah, I know.
I think that's a lot of the business.
My sales VP would be really into what you're saying. She really wants us to start the consultative arm.
Yeah, I think Pradeep and I worked at a company called Bloomage, and we built a merchandising analytics product. A lot of the same type of output potentially for merchants, but I would, you might have different opinion, but I think their utility of our product was limited by their bandwidth and interest in extracting those insights themselves versus when we had our customers, so more people do it, sort of engagement people do it for them.
Yeah, so from our perspective, when we were starting and trying to be lean, we had basically 3 engineering consulting firms that really became our tight partners. Like Fair & Pierce is one that happens to be based in Walnut Creek. Cambridge Systematics is another. But now that we're a little stronger, we maybe don't want them billing for all those hours. We'd like all that money ourselves.
So a follow-up question is, in designing your product, are you looking for feedback from the consulting partners or from like the transit agencies or?
Both. So usually their projects have accounts, and like there'll be agencies and consulting firms on the same project account. So from whoever. It's interesting because they have different feedback. Like the consulting firms, in my experience, and Claire, you can tell me if you disagree, like always want more detail and more optionality and more ability. And the agencies are like, too much, just tell me the answer. I don't care about all your little assumptions. Yeah.
How do you trade that off?
we're moving towards, well, we have user permissions, so we can hide things from some users, but we're moving towards like basically having like the layer under the layer where the product can be like, here's the answer, and then it's like, want to change all the options, double click here, and you get a much more technical.
I think the most challenging part of our product is understanding the results, setting it up itself, setting up studies, kind of like being able to visualize things and understand where people are moving. I'd say like a lot of you guys in this room would be able to do it too. So I think it's like a balance between actually helping them set up a project, and then it's a whole nother game to have them actually fully understand what they've studied and make sure they set it up in the most effective way and know the numbers and those sorts of things.
And it's a normal startup growth challenge, because when the first launch was for a very narrow, we knew exactly who we were designing for. It's like for transportation engineering professionals who have a Master of Science in transportation engineering, who know the question they're answering. And now that we're bigger, we have to sell to more people, and then we get the problem that Claire was describing.
I think we're good. Again, Laura, thank you so much for coming.
And we're 2 blocks away, so.
And so, I hope everyone refers their friends to jobs at Streetlight Data, and we'll find you if there are more questions.
Sure. And we also have a new East Coast office in Virginia, if you have any friends from DC.